Welcome to NASIG 2025 and welcome to Trying to Fit an Octopus in a Box, Tracking Perpetual Access During a Serial Cancellation Project. Our speakers today are Sarah Lindsay, the Metadata Services Department Head and Acquisitions Librarian from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and Tamara Pilko, the Electronic Resources Librarian, also at the University of California, Santa Cruz. So I'm going to hand it over to them.
Thank you so much. Well, today we are going to discuss how we approached gathering perpetual access information in the midst of an urgently needed and swiftly moving cancellation project. We're going to talk about how we approached our project, but we're also going to build some community around practices and challenges of this type of work. And to that end, we have included several anonymous polls. And the more participation, the richer the conversation. So please don't be shy. We wanted to give this presentation because we found that this process was so multifaceted. Wrangling a project like this was a lot, and we realized that while we're not the first and we won't be the last, we wanted to share some of the things that we learned that were useful for us and that we felt like helped make our project successful. And so as I said, we're going to have several polls during this presentation. Once you're in the Mentimeter, just keep that browser window open and you can return to it throughout the presentation to answer future polls. And you can see for joining at the top, you can go to menti.com and you can enter the code or you can use the QR code. And we're going to give everyone a minute just to get over there. But the question is, how do you feel about perpetual access in one word? And we've given you a scale here from super lethal blue-ringed octopus to party octopus.
May take a second for the results to display here. I'm going to go ahead and just move my screen over so we can see it.
Sure. I appreciate hunger very much. Yeah. Overwhelmed, complicated, suspicious, unmanageable. Um, I'm glad somebody went with party octopus.
Yes.
Yikes. But also preferred. Um,
These are great words.
mhm.
All right.
So I'm sure that I don't know the purpose of that, right? Like you're not alone. However you're feeling, you're not alone. Um, so I'll just give you a little bit of background on our library and how we do acquisitions to begin with. UCSC's library employs a demand-driven acquisition model, purchasing monographs as needed rather than relying on predictive assessment or approval plans. We also do not have the more traditional collections model of subject area specialists making collection decisions. The bulk of our acquisitions budget is allocated to electronic serials management through the California Digital Library Consortium in multi-campus agreements that are hard to exit. Therefore, local serial subscriptions are one of the most accessible areas for our collections budget to cut to create budget reductions. And to give you an idea of our local serial collection size, in the 2018-19 academic year, we had 287 local serial subscriptions. And after a cancellation project in 2020, in the 21-22 year, we had 175 local serial subscriptions. And that cancellation project involved close faculty collaboration and surveys, as well as contracting with Harasowitz for usage statistics on all the titles. We spent over a year gathering information before decisions were made. And as you can see on the slide, even the most carefully charted voyages can unexpectedly bump into cuts. This time around, with this project, campus budget cuts were immediate and significant, and all areas of the library budget had to be reduced, and we had to work quickly. Before, again, getting into the nitty-gritty of our process, I just wanted to mention other steps we've taken to make sure that library users still have access to canceled materials. Our cancellations for this project have been based on how the materials were being used. Keeping resources with deep usage has been our first priority. And as we've cut titles, we've pivoted toward alternative access methods, specifically enhancing our reliance on interlibrary loan and incorporating Article Galaxy, which is a commercial document delivery service. This shift allows us to maintain access to a wide range of scholarly titles for our users on a transactional per article basis after subscriptions were canceled. And we've had Article Galaxy activated for a few months. And while we were preparing the presentation, our first invoice came in. And we're in the middle of the spring quarter, and the invoice was for $57. So I would say thus far, the strategy is really working for us. And the team that we formed to manage the process and identify and implement these cuts, though this team didn't meet as a group regularly, there were open lines of communication between all team members. So members of our team included our AUL of Collections and Services, who provided strategic oversight, set budget targets, and had the final decision-making authority. Our collection strategy analyst, who gathered usage statistics, performed the initial data analysis, interpreted usage metrics, and evaluated cost per use. The acquisitions and e-resources staff, Tamara and I, and another person who managed vendor relationships, tracked subscription costs, deciphered the licensing terms, and ultimately processed the cancellations. And finally, access services and interlibrary loan staff who provided input on the feasibility and impact on the ILL workload and workflows and helped integrate Article Galaxy. And ILL have also become a part of our acquisitions workflow, forwarding for purchase titles that have been requested that they can't get.
So when we talk about perpetual or post-cancellation access in this presentation, we're referring to the continued ownership and access to explicitly defined content after a subscription is canceled. This is often defined in a license agreement and typically includes any years in which a subscription was paid. However, that's not always true. And also, the continued access may or may not be on the same platform as current access. The terms perpetual access and post-cancellation access are often used interchangeably, although they do refer to different aspects of continued access to content. So perpetual access also includes larger efforts to preserve content on behalf of everyone. For example, the archiving efforts of Clocks and Portico. And post-cancellation has different flavors as outlined here. And a big thank you to University of Minnesota for defining these terms so well. And on to our next poll.
Yes, so do you track the perpetual rights of your current subscriptions?
Let me see. There's a lag. I'll go ahead and move it over here. Oops. Here we go.
My gosh, I'm so impressed with y'all. And spoiler alert, we weren't really doing that. So we're in the no category, but I like that there's plenty of people too who just aren't sure. Right, sort of, definitely, Beverly. Like, it's maybe you track them for a couple titles where it's really easy, but most of them you don't know, or new titles as the licenses come in, maybe you're registering those, but the old ones you don't, or I think it's that's why we said octopus in a box, because it's so many different flavors. Each resource is a little bit different, right? You've worked with one publisher, you've worked with one publisher.
Yes. So at UCSC, we have not undertaken a large-scale project to record post-cancellation access coverage for our subscriptions in Alma or another ERM. We have made an effort to add any information for new subscriptions to Alma or when encountering the data during a renewal process or sorting out an access issue. We're also part of the California Digital Library, which is the consortia for the UC libraries. So most of our subscriptions are through that organization. And while CDL has all that information in its record, there's not like a database that we can search to verify or use that information independently. And we didn't need it for this project because we focused on local subscriptions only. As you know, this is a complicated item to track with all of the possible oddities involved. And so we've included a handout of resources that's linked in Sched and at the end of this presentation that includes some sources if you're interested in tackling a post-cancellation access determination project, as the Minnesota Libraries called it. So we're not going to go into detail of doing like a prospective project. This is actively during our cancellations.
Mhm.
So for this project, we needed to determine, track, and implement in Alma the post-cancellation access for the specific titles that were canceled. To do this, we used a few categories of resources that are listed here. One complication was that the decision making for which titles were canceled was happening at the same time as the metadata services activities to track and implement it, meaning we did not receive a full list of cancellations all at once, so we could know that X number of titles was from a certain vendor, for example. So for that reason, we approached the project in 2 rounds and then also relied heavily on collaborative tools that could update the list in real time to help us make sure that nothing would fall through the cracks. And I'll go into more depth about each of these categories in more detail, but first we'd like to get a sense of how you all like to subscribe to eJournal content and where you store your license agreements. Let me switch over again. Here we go.
And this doesn't have to be what your library is doing primarily, but just what your preferred method is. They're neck and neck.
Mhm. Interesting. It seems like it is the same as our preference, largely. Let's see. We put this in the order of our preference. So subscription agents first, then directly with the publisher, usually when it's not available through the agent, and then
Mhm.
um, through our consortia. Okay, next question is,
So where do you store your license agreements? Will they all be combination? Unforeseen aspect of offering a combo answer.
we largely prefer cloud file drive. Sometimes they get stuck in email, but we've been making a concerted effort to get it all in the shared drive.
I think we got out of the filing cabinet business.
Thank you for sharing. Um, since we at Santa Cruz largely prefer to use a subscription agent, we relied heavily on the EBSCO and Harasowitz portals as our starting point to record our PCA coverage. And these screenshots show how the portals can list your access. And we use the information here as well as order history on the other tabs to establish the dates and volume information that we then emailed to vendors for confirmation. We also did have to reference some of our PDF license agreements to verify or clarify information when the portal wasn't clear, or particularly for the handful of subscriptions that we did have directly through the publisher. We are also a member of Portico through our consortia and did submit for access for a couple titles that were canceled.
Oh, I wanted to call attention in the chat. Sarah Hamilton mentions we didn't put ERM as one of our storage locations. I think that tells you something about our current setup more than anything else. But thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you. So for collaborative tools that we used, our department already relies heavily on these tools for our other projects and daily work. Santa Cruz is a Google Workspace campus, so not surprisingly, we used Google Drive particularly, and Google Sheets to track our project. We use the import range function to make sure that any updates that the collection strategy analyst made in her sheet were copied to the metadata strategy sheet. And a screenshot of our working sheet is here. And we've included a template copy in our resources handout if you're interested in what all the dropdowns have. We also use like the checkbox to make it turn gray when everything was completed, really trying to make it easy to reference. Our license agreements are also in Google Drive, so all members of the team had access to those in order to reference them. Additionally, we have a departmental email account that we all prefer to use when emailing vendors. We also set up a message template for confirming our post-cancellation coverage with vendors. A copy of that's also in our resources handout if you're interested. And I've got a screenshot on the next slide. And the other tool that really came in handy was the Counter 5 report tool. We actually installed it on a Google Drive location. So this allowed us all to use the same vendor list and save any retrieved counter reports in a single location. This tool uses API calls to get counter data, and that's also linked in the resources. And here are screenshots of the counter report tool on the left and an example of the email message that we sent to vendors on the right. We've really made a concerted effort to keep information in these shared spaces and move away from using individual email inboxes. In our shared inbox, we also use tags for each person, maybe a task or type of information to ensure the team knows who's responsible for which email. And so this example here has my name tagged next to the subject line. And in the bottom corner is how we chose to tag invoices so we all could know which items to deal with first. We highly recommend using or setting up a shared email or group message like a Google group for a project like this. Otherwise, information is likely to get stuck in one person's inbox. All right, time for another poll.
So, because our project was so clearly based on this cross-departmental collaboration, we thought it would be interesting to ask you all, how difficult would it be to acquire this type of information considering your institution's org chart? So, for license terms, are you able to email the person, or are you the person who gets those, or perpetual access coverage, order history, or is your library organized in such a way that you're really siloed away from this one of these types of information? Oh, this is so good. What a good development. I guess maybe that means it's all on you.
Yeah, so interesting. I guess I'm glad to see that it's not as difficult for most people, at least here. Maybe it's just you or you and one other person dealing with it. I think I agree. Trying to acquire the coverage information is slightly more difficult than the other things. Because you're trying to get at the information in multiple places, contacting the vendor, waiting, making sure that you follow up if you need to.
Yeah, and there's some conversation in the chat. Like, I'm wondering if a lot of NASIG attendees are coming from smaller institutions, maybe than where we're based. But if you're the person who holds it all, it's easier to get it, maybe. But still, I just want to acknowledge it's just as much work. So.
Mhm.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of how we managed the data and the workflow. Um, so we're an Alma campus, and while extracting data from Alma into the spreadsheets was invaluable for analysis and collaboration, it created a static snapshot of the information. And because we were juggling multiple information sources for our data extracts, renewal invoices coming in at random times, and working with collaborators both within our department and from other areas, a key challenge was synchronizing our external tracking with our live data. And this meant that if a title was marked done on a spreadsheet, for instance, the cancellation was initiated, we also needed a clear way to reflect this status within Alma itself, especially as multiple people were working on different aspects. and maybe running new data exports, right? So to track project status in our Alma records, we utilized the third reporting code field to specifically tag titles as part of the cancellation project. And this code applied even if an order record couldn't be fully closed immediately, like we were waiting for a final outstanding invoice. It served as an indicator that the title had been analyzed, vendors had been contacted, and the cancellation was in process, preventing redundant review. And then we were also able to leverage existing Alma functionality to create inroads into this large set of data. So our library already had a practice of labeling local serial records, not managed through the major vendors like EBSCO or Harasowitz as manual renewal. And some of that has to do with our perhaps bias of not liking working directly with publishers because they forget to notify us when our renewal is due sometimes. So we wanted to remind ourselves. Alma already just automatically generates a list of these order records that are awaiting manual renewal. And we use that list to identify titles with upcoming expiration dates that required analysis, even if the vendors hadn't yet sent renewal notices. And then while we were working on the project, Alma introduced a new tagging functionality for order records. And we use these tags to assign order records to specific team members for action or to indicate a title's current status. And we also used the e-resource task list. Tamara was able to create a custom label for perpetual access switch to track titles being worked on. And, you know, I know these are really specific examples, and if you're not on Alma, it might be so what, or, but what I want you to take away from this is just that there are so many variables and details for each title that it's really essential to leave yourself and your team numerous breadcrumbs. So just avoid relying on memory and instead embed notes, statuses, and indicators directly within all your systems and tools. And this comprehensive documentation is key just to supporting yourself.
So we are here to be your cheerleaders. Just go for it. This is a big project with lots of moving parts. You got to shove that octopus into the box. So especially when dealing with emailing support at a vendor, you're often, emailing it into the abyss. So don't hesitate to move forward when you're not getting a response. Also, go ahead and just email your vendor anyway, even if you think you know all the information, or even if you think you have no access. We surprisingly got some information back that we did. We're pleasantly surprised, or they updated to in their records, it showed that we had more access than we thought we did. This is the type of project where you have to let go of perfectionism, which is something I struggle with. You won't be able to complete each part of the task when you would like to, so don't worry about it. It's not you. It's not your fault. This is a project that involves multiple stages, so don't take it personally. Also, if you are having a really hard time getting a response from a vendor, leverage your contacts at that vendor, or even if it's not in the right department, sometimes they can roll the ball along a little bit quicker for you. And then in our case, we had catastrophic budget cuts. So when you're emailing them, you can lay it on thick. This is not a negotiation. This is just how it is. I'm not interested in looking at another one of your products. I just need this information. Please confirm. It is how it is.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you can do it. So we uploaded in SCED our resources document, where you can visit it, this link or QR code It includes some presentations, papers on post-cancellation access, a link to that Counter5 report tool, a copy of our email template, and then also a link to the Google Sheet tracking template. So it has some drop downs like yes, no, vendor contacted, vendor retrieved, etc. And before we move into Q&A, we wanted to do a little crowdsourcing and ask you if you have anything you want to share. There's been lots of great ones in the comments. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll put the link in the chat.
I really appreciate Christina's comment that their library tried to track the years covered in the order records, but then they don't match what the publisher says. I think that that is just an extra challenge that an extra curveball that you might deal with in a project like this. And oh gosh, we used to keep our order records for years with the idea that it might help us get perpetual access. And then, like going back to the beginning of time, we kept order records for perpetual access. And then we realized that it really was down to what the publisher said on that day when you asked them, do I have perpetual access or not? Not what records you had kept. So that might be a presentation for a different session, but yeah.
You have a few questions in your Q&A. If you would like to start those now. The first one is, my experience with PC rights through Portico has not been very successful, and it was a very cumbersome process. What was your experience like?
For us, it was very easy. I submitted the form online, or emailed it to them rather. I got the form online and they got back to me. I forget how long it took, but I didn't have any issue.
Okay.
I can
Um,
take that next one.
yeah, sure, go ahead.
It's just asking what catastrophic means, what percentage of our budget was the cut. And for the library in total, the cut this year was over 12%. And so I think we don't yet have we couldn't tell you yet what the percentage of our collections budget was because some of these cuts are still in process. But it felt pretty catastrophic. And we're expecting continued cuts for the next few years.
And then your third question is, and I'm super interested in this because we're migrating over to Alma. Where in Alma do you document post-cancellation access?
So in the electronic collection and in the portfolios themselves, there are options. So at the collection level, you could, there's a drop down for if it's a perpetual and current access or just perpetual access. And then for the actual coverage itself, once that's selected to include perpetual, there's a separate section where you can record the dates of the perpetual access for the portfolio. But do note that if you say switch the drop down to say just perpetual, it's not going to switch those dates. Then you have to copy the perpetual access dates into the current access for it to actually affect the link resolver. But it does have those fields so that if you just want to record them now, it's a separate section in the portfolio details.
You have another question. Can you please tell me more about the Counter 5 report tool? Is it from the Counter team?
No, actually, I'm going to get this wrong. I think I put it in the document, the resources document. It was developed by a collaboration between a librarian and the comp sci team at her university. So she had these students do a project in which they coded the tool, and then it uses the your API counter sushi info to pull in information. And it also has a cost per use section as well. It's a really handy tool.
There is another question. Do you ever use KBART files to ensure PCA?
We have not, since we've not done a large project, but I could see how that would be very useful.
You have another question. Are you using local collections for PCA in Alma?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, we have not done the creation of separate collections just to track that access. In some cases, we have um, subscriptions that have been absorbed into our consortial subscription. So we have perpetual access from our local sub that was canceled. And to do that, I put the information in Alma and then deactivated the portfolio or the collection, and then put like an internal note in there to cue whoever's looking at it. But we haven't set up separate collections for them.
And I see a question in chat. Was this just about journals, or did this project include databases? And it did include databases. Um, so it was really any subscription model based payment um, was up on the chopping block.
You've got another question in the Q&A. How do you manage tracking the titles moving in and out of publishers for licensed content? Do you refer to transfer notifications?
We would, and I think in most, if not all, there's a very small few that had multiple titles. Most of these were single title subscriptions, so we didn't really have to deal with that. All of our packet, most of our packages are with our consortia. I see some comments about, verification or proof of years of an order. And what worked for me, at least for a couple of them, was just doing screenshots of what I could see in EBSCO or Harasowitz. They accepted that as proof.
You've got another question in the Q&A. I had a great experience with Portico. It was the publisher that gave me a hard time, specifically RSNA, who would not work with me. I had to have EBSCO, our subscription agent, assist, and of course, they have our payment history. The experience was traumatizing. LOL.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I can't say I looked forward to doing all the parts of this project, but yes, sometimes some parts are more painful than others.
Another uh another question. We have seen titles that granted PCA, but when moving to a new publisher, they no longer granted the historic terms.
Mm, that's too bad.
And I guess that's just a general kind of comment on this, on perpetual access, is you are at the whim of the vendor a little bit. I don't know. That's grim. But but yeah, as you reach out to them, I guess keep your documentation.
Mhm. And if you are a member of Portico, maybe you could investigate with them.
We have another question. Did you run into any problems with determining Print Plus online versus print and complementary online, where the
Mm.
publisher says the complementary online isn't perpetual? Our orders history isn't clear between the two.
I don't think we ended up being denied some perpetual access. I think we experienced going more in the favorable direction where we weren't sure if it was included and it ended up being included. Um, I guess that is the tricky part. But contacting your vendor and then having that discussion with them is probably the best way to approach it, and then arguing your case of why you would prefer, why they should help you and offer you the online access. You know, it's definitely not explicit in the terms, which is unfortunate.
And then you've got another question. How do you handle PCA that isn't hosted by the publisher? Like if
Mm.
they want to send you a hard drive, for example.
Yes, so we prepared for that and didn't end up getting any files sent to us. I think that's a discussion that you should have in advance, and maybe we should have included that in this presentation. That's a great question. Um, but anticipating that at least to store it temporarily, and then in our case, we found space where we would store it, and then down the line figure out how to serve it to our users. So we didn't tackle the entirety of that as part of this project, but we were prepared to be able to save it locally.
And then we've got a comment. We've canceled titles through the years, and understandably, the subscription agents are resistant to claim the PCA for titles we canceled since they are no longer active.
I guess, do you mean to assist you with providing that information, or I haven't had to go retroactively to establish that, so I wonder.
Yes, since the titles are not active, they won't act on our behalf.
That's odd. I'm sorry. Perhaps just screenshots of what you can see in the portal and working with the vendor directly, or if they want confirmation from the subscription agent. That's unfortunate. I'm sorry.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. And we are at about time, and I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to wrap up.
Well, thank you all for being such an engaged group. This was, all we could have hoped for participation wise.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you to all of our participants. This has been recorded, and there are sessions following this, and also the Great Ideas Showcase. So please check those out. Thank you.